As we discussed, we're looking at workflow and production. So I've stitched our shot that we've been working on with an additional shot from the same scene to create a small sequence. Now I've done this actually directly within Nuke. Although Nuke is not an editing software, it does have the ability to stick two clips together using an append clip node. There you go. That will then, when it reaches the end of one frame at the frame range of one clip, it will simply jump to the next clip, and you can see that happening there. And you can actually add a cross dissolve. So I mean, I had 5 frames, you could add 10. What I want to show you is how we can work efficiently when we have multiple shots in a sequence which are in some ways similar. I also want to show you how I've built this scene, which is using a bit of everything that we've learned across the course. So let's go to the top of the tree. So we've got our render, our utilities render. Going down here we have our ambient occlusion and our fog render, and we have some 2D elements. So going back to the top and working our way down, we have our beauty render. The only thing I've done to the diffuse is I've actually desaturated the diffuse layer to get the wood a little bit more almost black and white. I didn't go for the Sin City look, but I wanted to get something a bit less saturated. In the reflections, I've also desaturated the reflection filter so that the brass lamp is a bit less crazy in the saturation. I prefer that look. And I've also color corrected the raw reflections to pump them up a little bit so everything's a little bit shinier. I've also used a grade node which is locked to a cryptomat on the plant, so I've actually pulled down the reflections on the plant, so that's after they're combined, so they're no longer raw, they're full reflections. So there we go. In the refractions I've done similar things, so I have manipulated all of the raw refractions. Here I've used the Y of the UVs, so the up and down. Here I've used a cryptomat, which I've used the spilled whiskey that was getting a bit lost in the render, so I've pumped it up a little bit, maybe less realistic but a little bit more visible. And I've also used my whiskey mask to just pull a little bit of the blue out of this whiskey so you don't get this very blue at the top, so just in the highlight it still stays a bit more yellow and a bit more whiskey coloured. So working our way down, the specular, I've added the specular and then I've actually bloomed the specular with a glow. Now the glow defaults to adding the glow onto the specular, but if you check this effect only tick box, it will just give you the glow itself, and that's great because it means I can control the specular and the glow bloom separately, and I think that bloom helps a little bit with the speculars. It just gives a little bit of a nice kick and bloom. I've then desaturated everything, so not quite like our Sin City effect, but similar. I've desaturated everything except the whiskey. And then I've added our caustics. Now I didn't get them as to the quality I wanted because I didn't really have the render time. But the nice thing about caustics is the light that passes through the whiskey picks up some of the whiskey color, and so this desaturated image picks up a little bit of color from the whiskey itself. So that's interesting. And I think if I were to increase the quality in the render, that could become a very, very nice effect. I've also tweaked the subsurface scatter, so I've just graded it to make the plant look a little more pleasing. So we've got a bit of colour in the plant, a bit of colour in the whiskey, and everything else is very close to black and white. I have self-illumination in here, even though we're not using self-illumination in this shot, because this entire setup is going to work as a template for not just this shot, but for multiple shots, and that's part of what I want to show you in this lesson. Let me just tidy that up a bit. I like to keep these tidy with everything within the right box. So once we get to the bottom of our back to beauty, what I've done is use light passes to relight the scene. So I'm going to pause the recording and we'll look at that in the next class.